The monitor next to my daughter's isolette had been beeping for 6 days straight, and I had learned to sleep through it the way you eventually learn to sleep through anything. Not peacefully, but out of pure necessity. She was 4 pounds, 11 ounces. 5 weeks early, born on a Tuesday afternoon, when my body decided it was done waiting. The NICU nurses had nicknames for all the babies on the unit. Little names they used to make parents feel like their children were known and not just charted. They called my daughter their feisty one, which made me cry the first time I heard it, because it felt like the kindest thing anyone had said to me in days. My name is Layla. I'm 33 years old, a third-grade teacher from Columbus, Ohio, and until 6 days before that Tuesday, my life had been moving exactly the way I'd planned it, carefully, deliberately, one small piece at a time. My husband and I had been saving for 3 years. Not for a vacation, not for anything frivolous, for a down payment on a house. $22,400 sitting in a joint savings account at our local credit union. It had taken us longer than we'd expected because we were doing it without any help. That had become a quiet, accepted fact of my life. We did most things without any help. I found out something was wrong on a Thursday. Not with my daughter. She was gaining weight, finally, and the attending neonatologist had used the word discharge that morning, in a way that felt almost like a promise. I found out something was wrong when I tried to pay the first installment on our portion of the NICU bill. My debit card was declined. I thought it was a bank error. I actually laughed a little. That tired, frayed laugh you produce when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and a gas station granola bar, and something small goes sideways. I pulled up our banking app, expecting to see a processing delay or a misposted charge. What I saw instead was a transfer confirmation from 8 days earlier, time-stamped at 11:47 in the morning. The same morning I had gone into labor. $19,200 moved out of our savings account and into an account I didn't recognize. I sat in that plastic chair beside my daughter's isolette and read the number 3 times. I told myself it was fraud, that someone had compromised our account, that there was an explanation that made sense. Then I noticed the transfer had been initiated from an IP address in Gahanna, Ohio, 14 minutes from my parents' house, where my mother has lived for 31 years. My mother had been a co-signer on that savings account since I was 20, back when I was in college, and she'd insisted that having a second adult on a young person's account was just responsible. I'd been meaning to remove her for years. The same way you mean to update your emergency contacts or finally go through the box of old textbooks in the hall closet. You assume the thing will wait. She had full transfer authority. I hadn't known she'd ever use it. I called her from the NICU parking garage because I didn't want to have the conversation in front of the nurses. I stood in the cold concrete light of the second level and waited for her to pick up. She answered on the third ring, cheerful, asking how the baby was doing. "Mom," I said, "did you transfer money out of our savings account?" A pause, the particular kind of pause that isn't confusion, it's calculation. "Sweetheart, we knew you had a lot going on. We were going to explain everything when things calmed down. Did you transfer $19,000 out of our savings account?" Not a question. My voice had gone somewhere flat and precise, the voice I use when I'm trying to hold something together by the very edges. She sighed. The kind of sigh that carries the weight of someone who has been caught and has decided the best strategy is to treat the catcher as unreasonable. "Your sister's deposits were due," she said. "The venue, the photographer, the florist, all of them had final deadlines this week, or she'd lose her bookings entirely. We didn't have the money liquid right now, and your account was right there. And we thought, with everything going on with the baby, the last thing you'd want to worry about was your sister's day falling apart." I didn't say anything for a moment. The parking garage hummed. Somewhere below me, a car door slammed. "You took our house down payment," I said, "while I was in labor. We'll pay it back, Layla. Of course we'll pay it back. Your father and I aren't thieves." I hung up before she could finish the sentence. "I want to tell you about my sister, because this isn't actually about the money. Or it is about the money, but the money is just the most recent version of a story that has been telling itself in my family for as long as I can remember. My sister is 5 years younger than me. She's funny and warm and genuinely talented at a lot of things, and none of that is the reason she was always the sun that our household orbited. She was the sun the same way some people are left-handed. It wasn't a decision, it was just a fact that everything else arranged itself around. When I was 17, I won a regional writing competition. There was a small scholarship, a certificate the school displayed in the front hallway for a full month. My parents came to the ceremony, took 2 photos, and spent most of the reception asking my English teacher whether my sister might have a gift for writing too, since she'd really been enjoying journaling lately. When I graduated from Ohio State, I walked across the stage, and neither of my parents saw it. My sister had called from her dorm in a panic about a conflict with her roommate, and my mother had spent the entire ceremony in the lobby on the phone talking her through it. My father was there technically. He was sitting beside the lobby door in case my mother needed him. I worked 2 part-time jobs for all 4 years to stay afloat. My parents co-signed my student loans and considered that substantial help. They paid my sister's tuition directly, plus room and board, plus a monthly allowance for incidentals that was more than my hourly job paid in a week. When my husband and I got married, a small civil ceremony, just what we could afford, dinner at a restaurant we'd rented out for 3 hours with 20 people we loved. My sister arrived 40 minutes late because she'd gotten a blowout and the salon had run behind schedule. My mother thought this was perfectly reasonable. The toast my father gave mentioned my sister twice. He used her name both times and mine 0 times. I had filed all of this over the years in a folder inside myself, labeled things that hurt but cannot be changed. I'd gotten very good at keeping that folder closed. The $19,000 opened it again. My husband had figured out what happened before I even made it back upstairs to the NICU. He'd gotten the same banking notification I had, called the credit union while I was in the parking garage, and had already spoken to a representative who confirmed the transfer and explained that as a co-signer with transfer authority, my mother had acted within the technical permissions of the account. He was sitting in the chair I'd left when I came back, and he looked up at me with the expression of someone who is very carefully not saying what he actually thinks. "I know," I said. "We're going to be okay," he said, which is what he always says, which is part of why I married him. What he didn't tell me then, what he was already doing quietly in the background, was that he had found an attorney. Not a mediator, not someone gentle. A sharp woman at a firm downtown who specialized in civil disputes and had listened to the whole story over the phone that afternoon and said, very calmly, "What your mother did almost certainly constitutes unauthorized financial exploitation. Having technical account access doesn't make a unilateral transfer legal. Intent and consent both matter here." He also didn't tell me that he'd gone to the credit union in person 2 days later and requested a full transaction history, notarized, going back 4 years. He hadn't told me because he knew I was still in the place where I needed to sit beside my daughter and breathe. I stayed in the NICU for 4 more days. On the morning she was discharged, 4 pounds, 15 ounces finally wrapped in a striped hospital blanket, my mother texted asking if I'd had time to think and whether we could talk. I texted back, yes soon. Then I drove home, put my daughter in the crib we'd assembled in the spare room, and sat down at the kitchen table. My husband slid a folder across to me. Inside was the full transaction history, the attorney's letter of intent, and something I hadn't anticipated, a record of 3 previous transferring back 2 years, smaller ones, $50, $200, movements so modest they'd registered as rounding errors. Test runs, the attorney said, or just habit. Money moved quietly because it had always been allowed to move quietly. I sat with that for a long time. I called my mother once, the week after we came home. One question, "Did you tell my sister where the money came from?" A hesitation. I told her we were helping with the deposits. "Did you tell her it came from our savings account?" "Layla." "That's a no," I said, "okay." I added the note to the folder and didn't call again for 2 weeks. The bridal shower was the second Saturday in October, at a restaurant in Dublin with a private back room, fairy lights and a mimosa bar. 63 people were invited. My sister had sent me a sweet, excited text about the dusty rose napkin rings and how she couldn't wait to see me. I RSVP'd yes. I bought her a gift from the registry, a set of copper cookware, practical and expensive, exactly what she'd actually use, and wrapped it in cream paper with a brown satin ribbon. I told my husband I was going. "I know," he said. He had already made arrangements without telling me, because he knew that if he told me, I would spend 2 weeks arguing myself out of it. The certified letter, drafted with the attorney and reviewed 3 times, had been scheduled for delivery that Saturday afternoon. The timing was his idea. He showed me the draft, 7 paragraphs, calm, factual. outlining the unauthorized transfer, the documented history, the full amount owed, and the legal remedies available if repayment was not made within 30 days. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know," I said. "I want to." I wore a soft gray wrap dress, my grandmother's gold studs. I put my daughter in the carrier against my chest, because she was still small enough that I could, and because I wanted my parents to have to look at her. My sister hugged me at the door with real warmth, cupping the back of my daughter's head gently, saying she was absolutely perfect. I told her happy almost wedding, and I meant every word of it. This was never about her. It was about the two people who had raised both of us and who had decided, without ever saying it aloud, that her needs had no ceiling and mine had no floor. The party moved the way those parties do. Mimosas, little sandwiches cut into triangles, a game where you match celebrity couples to my sister's wedding color palette. I played along. I let my guard down just enough that my mother visibly relaxed somewhere around the 90-minute mark, her shoulders dropping, her laughter coming easier. She thought I had moved on, the quiet way I always did. At 2:17 in the afternoon, a man in a dark jacket stepped into the back room and asked for my parents by name. My father stood up, assuming it was a party delivery. Extra Prosecco, a forgotten catering item. He met the man near the door and signed for the envelope with the pleasant distraction of someone who has been talking about golf handicaps and hasn't fully returned to the room yet. He opened it, standing there. I watched his face move through 3 expressions in about 6 seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then the specific kind of dread that lives in the body and not just the mind. He tried to fold the papers back into the envelope, but his hands weren't cooperating well, and my mother had already seen his face and crossed the room. "What is it?" she said, low, though not low enough. "Nothing," he said. "We'll deal with it later." But my father's older sister, my aunt, a retired school administrator who has never in her 72 years successfully pretended not to notice something, had walked over from the mimosa station at exactly the wrong moment, drawn by some family instinct toward the scene no one was supposed to make. She caught sight of the letterhead, the name of the law firm, the line that read "Formal Demand for Repayment." She looked at my father, then at my mother, then across the room at me, standing beside the dessert table, with my daughter asleep against my chest, and my grandmother's earrings catching the October light. "Tell me," she said, in the voice she'd used for 30 years to extract truth from people who were trying to withhold it, "that those papers have nothing to do with Layla." Nobody answered. The party didn't end, but it changed, the way a room changes when a window opens and the temperature drops 2 degrees. Everything is technically the same and also not. My parents pulled me into the hallway outside the private room. The playlist kept playing through the wall. It didn't know anything was wrong. My mother's voice moved between fury and something that might have been grief. "You brought this here deliberately. Tonight of all nights." "Yes," I said. "How could you do this to your sister on her?" "I was in the NICU for 6 days," I said, and my voice was steady in a way I hadn't expected. "My daughter weighed less than 5 pounds when she was born. I was sitting next to an isolette trying to figure out if my baby was going to be okay, and you were moving our down payment to pay for floral arrangements. You want to talk about timing? Tell me when the right time was for what you did." My father looked at the floor. That was new. "We were always going to pay it back," my mother said. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Layla? What do you want from us?" I had thought about this. In the car on the way over, and in the 3 a.m. dark between my daughter's feedings and sitting at the kitchen table across from a folder I had never wanted to need. "I've been the responsible one my whole life," I said. "I paid my own way through school. I didn't ask for a car, or help with rent, or a wedding you funded. I didn't ask you to treat me the same as my sister. I gave up on that a long time ago. All I needed was for you not to take from me. And you couldn't manage that." My father looked up, his eyes were wet. "There's a 30-day window in that letter," I said. "If the money is repaid in full, we won't pursue further action. That's not a threat. It's just information. Have your attorney call ours." My sister had appeared in the hallway by then, still holding her mimosa glass, looking between all of us with an expression that was entirely new on her face. Not the easy confidence that things would be smoothed over. Something closer to horror. "How much did they take?" she asked quietly. "Tatum," my mother started. How much did they take from her? The number landed in the hallway like something physical. My sister set her glass down very carefully on the little ledge by the coat hooks. She turned to my parents and said, in a voice I had never heard from her, "You told me you had money set aside. You didn't tell me it was her savings." "We did have it," my mother began. "It was her baby's house money." My sister turned to me, and what was on her face was the most honest thing I had seen from my family in years. "Layla, I'm so sorry. I genuinely didn't know." I believed her. That was the thing about my sister. She had been raised to receive without asking where things came from. But underneath that habit was not a bad person. Just someone who had never been given a reason to ask. "I know," I said, and I meant it. My father called 3 days later. He didn't lead with excuses. He said, "I've been wrong about a lot of things for a long time. I think this is just the first one that finally had a dollar amount on it, so it was harder to look away from." He drove to our apartment alone the following weekend, and sat at our kitchen table, and set a cashier's check down in front of me. The full amount. He had liquidated part of his retirement account to do it. He didn't ask for thanks or acknowledgement. He sat there a while after, and eventually he said, "We told ourselves you were strong enough not to need us the way your sister did." And what that actually meant was that we decided it was easier not to look. I didn't cry until he'd already left. My mother's apology came later, and it came with conditions. More of the familiar, "You have to understand what we were dealing with, and we never wanted it to get this far." But it came, partial, imperfect, something. My sister called on a Sunday, and we talked for 2 hours, just the two of us. She asked a lot of questions about things she'd been too young to notice growing up, or too sheltered to understand. At the end, she said she wanted to do better. She said she wanted us to actually be sisters, not just share parents. I told her I wanted that too. I still don't know exactly what shape it takes. We're figuring it out. My husband and I rebuilt the savings in 7 months, faster than the first time, because now we knew we could. We're under contract on a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with a backyard big enough for a swing set. The closing date is 3 weeks out. My daughter is 9 months old now. She started pulling herself up to stand last week, gripping the edge of her crib rail with both fists, looking at me with complete, triumphant concentration. She doesn't know yet what anything costs or what it took to bring her here. She just knows she's figured something out, and she wants me to see it. I think about what I'll tell her someday. About families and the stories they tell about themselves. About how the people who love you can also fail you. And how both of those things can be true at the same time, without one canceling the other out. I think I'll tell her what I finally understood that afternoon in a restaurant hallway, holding her small sleeping weight against my chest, while my parents looked at a legal demand and, for the first time in my life, could not explain my inconvenience away. Being capable is not the same as not needing anything. The people who call you the strong one sometimes mean it as a compliment, and sometimes they mean it as permission. Permission to look away, to take, to assume you'll absorb whatever they don't want to carry. Learning the difference between those two things. And then saying out loud, in front of however many witnesses it takes, "I am not the one you get to take from anymore." That's the whole thing. That's everything it took me 33 years to say clearly. If you stayed with me through all of this, thank you. I mean that. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I genuinely want to know. And I'll see you in the next story.